Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today I want to talk about the untimely death of the DCEU on this trip into the gray area coming up right now. Honestly, opinion nerds, given the way it was treated, I'm surprised it held out as long as it did. Dear gathered friends and family, it is with a heavy heart that I am forced to share that our beloved DCEU has lost its long battle with box office illness and has finally passed beyond the world of direct-to-streaming specials and into the next. Of the DCEU, I can only say that it died as it lived, encircled by a mob of angry comic book nerds stabbing at it with limp moral analysis and accusations, all the while crying and angrily shouting, "Why is Zack Snyder making me do this?" The newly creatively pregnant DC Films co-presidents James Gunn and Peter Safran were present to pull the plug on the ailing franchise as they planned the birth of its replacement. As Gal Gadot said a tearful goodbye on Twitter, The Rock and Henry Cavill could not be reached for comment, the former still busy trying to make his Black Adam math work and the latter on his way to break Liam Hemsworth's legs. When asked to deliver today's eulogy, Ben Affleck walked away hysterically cackling while giving us the finger. The DCEU will be interred on the HBO Max service, at least until that finally catches fire and burns to the fucking ground, after which the combined ashes will be unceremoniously dumped into a landfill somewhere in New Jersey. The following is a work of personal expression based on personal accounts and observations, not structured polling, deep research, or scientific analysis. This is based on an accounting of my own personal experiences and perspective. It might be biased, but it's my life, so I'm allowed to be biased. There may be some things said in here that people want to argue with, and to that I say, go ahead and argue. At this point, it changes nothing. This is how I see things. If you don't like it, there's not much I can do for you. Either deal with it or don't. It makes no difference to me. So, let me tell you how I got here. I was born in 1976, a mere 2 years before the birth of our Lord Richard Donner's Superman. But this film, seminal as a soiled Kleenex, was not my first exposure to the world of DC Comics. My first date with the superheroes of DC was through a combination of the various incarnations of the Super Friends animated series for the mid-1970s, weekend reruns of the 1966 Batman live-action series, the New Adventures of Batman animated series from 1977, and the 1940 Superman animated shorts from the Fleischer Studios. I wouldn't see Superman the movie until it began running on television in the early 1980s. Between all the Superman films, as well as Supergirl, the Linda Carter Wonder Woman series, the Kathy Lee Crosby Wonder Woman TV movie, all the Batman films, the Ruby Spears Superman, Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Lois and Clark The New Adventures of Superman, the Flash TV show from 1990, all the Silver Age Batman, Superman, and Justice League comics my Uncle Russell left behind, plus my own comics either given, bought, or stolen, and the mountain of book and records, books for kids, action figures, various pencil toppers, wallets, notebooks, folders, tchotchkes, and doodads, not to mention the Batman and Superman footy pajamas I wore until they were so faded they both became only vaguely discernible ghosts of their former glories. I think it's fair to say that by the time I was 25, I put in more than my fair share of time in the trenches for DC Comics. I'm also a movie guy, not by trade or education, but by exposure. My parents raised me up on the films they were watching when I was young because including me and making sure I understood what we were seeing was a lot easier than sending me out of the room or trying to carve out time where we all watched something different. We didn't have cable or even a second television in the house until I was 10, so most of what I watched were movies taped off of TV broadcasts. These were not films made for kids, but the TV editing made them safer to watch. Movies like Star Trek The Motion Picture and The Wrath of Khan, The Thing, The Terminator, and Aliens were films I watched before I was old enough to be watching them. I also watched movies like Cocoon, Overboard, Stripes, Ghostbusters, MASH, and Airplane, as well as other 80s kid staples like the Star Wars films, E.T., and the Indiana Jones movies. Sunday mornings were filled with Abbott and Costello, followed followed by a morning movie. I was going to my local art theater, rest in peace Royal Oak, Maine, to watch films before I even knew what an art film was. They were all just movies to me. I had a well-rounded media upbringing, and I feel like that's given me a pretty solid foundation of media literacy and an understanding of the filmmaking process. It doesn't make my opinions better than anyone else's, but I've worked very hard to give them enough mass to have value. I'm telling you all this to put in perspective where I'm coming from. I'm not an outsider or someone who jumped on board the train either because of who was driving or because it was suddenly the in thing to do. I've been on this journey a very long time. So believe me when I tell you that the fandom I had spent my entire life being a part of turned on me when it campaigned to demonize and destroy something I saw genuine value in as a longtime fan and moviegoer. And they did it because, as hard as it is to look at, a lot of them are superficial, jealous, insecure, and petty people. It's perfectly fine not to like something. Everyone has a right to their own tastes, preferences, and emotional reactions to anything. What you don't have a right to do is try and take something of value away from another person just because you don't like it. If the DCEU is dead, these fans were the ones that killed it. And like the true villains they are, they believe they were in the right. So how did we get here? The release of both Iron Man and The Dark Knight in 2008 reignited the public tribalism between DC and Marvel fandoms. Even though it wasn't the first time a Marvel and a DC film product had been released in the same year, the movies put out by Fox and Sony had always been looked at as separate from Marvel as an entity. This was the first time it was DC versus Marvel directly, and Marvel was already upping the stakes by announcing they were going all in on the connected universe idea, a series of films that took place in a singular narrative space that allowed the different characters to make appearances with one another. This meant that after a Superman-Batman film failed to materialize in 2004, Marvel was beating DC to the punch in the space that DC had created. Sure, the Justice League animated series had run in one form or another from 2001 to 2006, but animation isn't looked at with the same prestige as big-budget filmmaking. In this business, you're nothing if you don't get a live-action film, and the mounting success of the MCU was bolstering these fans' sense of entitlement. Marvel had what DC wanted, and they were rubbing it in their faces. Any notion of a shared universe of DC films hinged on the performance of Man of Steel, the first full-scale reboot of the Superman film franchise. Coming on the heels of both the Nolan Batman finale and Marvel's first cumulative superhero film, there was a lot of pressure to perform. Despite what some fans want to believe, the 2013 release was always intended to be the first film in a connected universe, with NWB President Jeff Robinov confirming as much at the time. The question was always going to be how that was going to manifest. The assumption from many was that WB would simply follow the Marvel formula, a steady string of light action blockbusters featuring individual characters eventually culminating in a Justice League team-up film representing a larger, overarching plot for the franchise. If DC fans were going to get what Marvel fans had, fortune and glory, this was what they saw as the best path to it, even if it did mean suffering the indignity of being called copycats for the effort. It was never about making the best or most interesting films. Up to that point, even the MCU entries had been getting pretty mixed reviews. The goal was getting to the cinematic universe where all of their favorite characters and stories would finally get the recognition they felt they deserved. There's been a lot of discussion about where and how this DC film franchise went astray, and a lot of people will blame the filmmakers' creative choices without considering why those choices bothered them so much. It's all accusation and no introspection, even to this day. Warner Brothers, DC's parent company, had to sign off on everything before it could be put to film and released. So the idea that David Goyer or Zack Snyder or David Ayer simply ran off with the properties and did whatever the fuck they wanted with them is stupid, bordering on absurd. Some fans will claim their attitude is about maintaining fidelity to the source material, either in text or in spirit. But given what I've experienced, it really seems more about both protecting a feeling of ownership over the material and avoiding the cognitive dissonance of being asked to accept ideas that conflict with those they collectively maintain as true, made all the worse by the admission that they would have suffered the changes had the films been more, quote-unquote, well-received. There is a general belief in fandom that it's the job of those who adapt this material to service the fandom's interests, needs, and wants first and foremost because they're the ones that keep the characters alive and viable. But we know people will buy licensed merchandise even if they don't engage with the characters on any other level. You don't need to read Wonder Woman comics to wear a Wonder Woman t-shirt. Within a margin of error, it can be easily assumed that those casual consumers aren't going to care that much about changes made to the material as long as they remain entertained. So if what we're really talking about are people who read the comics on a regular or even semi-regular basis, we're talking about an insultingly high level of entitlement from a minority group of people who can't seem to admit that if their tastes and preferences were so in touch with the masses, superhero comics wouldn't be dying a slow, painful, gurgling death. There are a lot of complaints people have about the series of films that started with Man of Steel, the validity or value of which can be debated elsewhere. The core of these complaints, the chewy nougat of truth at the center of all the creamy complaining, is the idea that the choices Zack Snyder and WB made were keeping these fans from getting the depictions of the characters and stories they were owed, often expressed by the many "we deserve to see X" posts you'll find online. These outsiders were standing in the way of these fans seeing their ideal vision of the franchise realized on screen, even though with very little prodding you would find their ideal version is just a carbon copy of the various animated shows from the 90s and 2000s most of them grew up with. While Marvel was getting strange praise for making their films for the fans, a statement I'm still not entirely sure how to resolve with reality other than to point out that Kevin Feige oversaw a studio whose goal was to make movies with the broadest appeal possible, Snyder was getting bludgeoned by fans for making the films for himself. You know, like a filmmaker does. Some will try to make frustratingly ignorant arguments about the skill or quality of the filmmaking or writing or storytelling or production values of the films, but these often end up being shallow style over substance arguments that don't have much weight beyond a statement that the commenter disagrees with the choices, which, okay. But the argument always comes back around to some statement about how the characters were mishandled in Snyder's vision. Of course, the impression that characters were mishandled or misunderstood has nothing to do with how the characters function within the films, but how they compare to how someone believes they should be presented, a perspective that extended to critics who would negatively comment on aspects of the presentation without discussion of their narrative function. The possibility that these depictions could have brought new fans into the house was irrelevant or even detrimental because those people would be fans of a broken version of the character and that was unacceptable. Worse than that was the possibility that differences in the characters that were seen as popular among outside audiences because of the films might find their way into other depictions, and that absolutely could not be allowed. Quite often, the existence of these changes would lead to a cognitive dissonance, a discomfort at being presented information that challenged a long-held belief or truth that these fans could only resolve by a rejection of the new information expressed through misrepresenting the material in their criticism in order to devalue and mock them to make any genuine discussion about them impossible. Often the prevailing wisdom behind this was based on a variation of the concept of the fruit of the poisonous tree. As long as the films don't conform to their perspective, which they see as fundamentally correct, then nothing about them can be either correct or good. If they're going to believe they are right, something has to be wrong. These fans don't see themselves as ambassadors. They see themselves as gatekeepers, protecting the sanctity of something that isn't theirs to protect. These are not my words. These are theirs. The ultimate expression of this sense of entitlement has to exist within Geoff Johns, the famed DC Comics writer who worked his way up the ranks in the company as it attempted to consolidate its control over DC-related products in the wake of the establishment of Marvel Studios. Johns bled DC Comics, and during his career as a writer, he showcased that he had a very specific idea of what the franchise was. He was also friends with Marvel's Kevin Feige, the two of them having worked as assistants to Richard Donner. Kevin Feige had more or less total authority over Marvel films, and the studio's output was a reflection of his vision. In 2010, Johns was promoted to Chief Creative Officer of DC Entertainment and had a direct hand in every major story or event that shaped and directed the DC Comics franchise. As CCO of DC Entertainment, Johns consulted on DC films, but unlike Marvel, DC does not directly finance production, so his influence on the films was limited, and he made it known during interviews that he wasn't happy about that. In 2016, Johns was promoted to president and CCO of DC Entertainment, and though credited as an executive producer on Batman v Superman, began to assert his influence on the films beginning with 2016 Suicide Squad in an attempt to reshape the direction of the fledgling franchise. Between 2016 and 2018, when Johns stepped down, the franchise suffered a series of setbacks as the release slate shuffled, writers and directors walked, and announced projects were either delayed or canceled altogether. This culminated in the absolute debacle that was 2017's Justice League, whose post-production was so disastrous it had a hand in ending the WB careers of a number of top-level executives, including Geoff Johns. Geoff Johns is the ultimate expression of this kind of fan. Geoff Johns loved DC. This is a person that thought he was the keeper and defender of the lore, and he thought that gave him the right to shape and control how people saw these characters and stories. He loved DC so much, he had to control it. And look where that got us. So, what do I do now? My experience with this fandom since the release of these films has been, in a word, unpleasant. I'm sure many of them are quite lovely in other areas, and I don't doubt or downplay their passion. But from what I've seen, their attitude and approach to all of this has been a combination of, give me that, it's mine, and if I can't get what I want, no one gets anything, as a great number of them that I've encountered have stated that if they can't get a Superman or Batman film that's to their liking, they would prefer not to have any at all. I started saying this way back when, and it still seems to be true. They can't stand the fact that someone else is having fun with their toys. All of this stupidity might mean something if it was getting them what they were so jealous of Marvel for, fortune and glory and a near unified fandom, but it isn't. The fandom is still as fractured and contentious as it has been, still arguing the same arguments they were having in 2013 and 2016. No one has learned anything, no one has admitted to anything, and nothing has changed. The only glimmer of light for the petty is that this supposed change in direction will finally push out the people they don't consider real, genuine fans. The people they feel don't deserve the material because they don't respect it like the real fans do. You know, other paying customers whose money is just as good as theirs. The real death of the DCEU is not the reconfiguring of a franchise at the corporate level. It's the death of an idea at the hands of a group of greedy gatekeepers who decided that because they couldn't see its value, it was inherently valueless. And why should the less deserving get something that was theirs by right? If the DCEU is dead, it's because real DC fans couldn't get out of their own way and do what they insist unhappy fans should do now. Just be grateful they were getting anything at all. I was already a DC fan and had been my entire life. I will continue to be a fan of DC because my love for these characters and their stories isn't reliant on any one depiction. I was a DCEU fan because of what the movies were as pieces of filmmaking and storytelling. Regardless of what happens going forward, that is something no real fan can take from me. Whether or not I'm a fan of future movies will be entirely dependent on how I feel about the films, the quality of the productions, and how they go about telling their stories. The films that started this had to prove their value to me, and the films that are to come will have to do the same. But to the people who tried to push me out of this fandom, the place I've spent the better part of 50 years, I have only this to say. I hope you get nothing you want and everything you deserve. When it comes to where we differ, I defer to the words of the great Rick Sanchez, who once said, "Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer." This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.